My family treated me like a servant. That's what you're here for. They laughed, handing me another list of chores. I just walked away. A year later, when their lives fell apart and they had no one left to help, they called me over and over, begging, "Hey Reddit, I've been thinking about this for a while and decided it was time to finally share. I, 29F, grew up in a family where, as the youngest, I was always expected to take the back seat. It didn't matter what I had going on, what I wanted to do, or what my interests were. I was simply there to help out, run errands, clean, and do anything else that needed doing. It's funny, because when I think back on it, I can't even remember a time when I wasn't expected to just drop everything for the family. But that's how it was. My older brother Elijah, 32M, was the golden child, always praised for his achievements, always the one they celebrated. Meanwhile, I was just there, not really celebrated, not really seen, just the one who was expected to manage all the behind the scenes work. Growing up, it was all about keeping up appearances. My parents, both in their 50s, worked a lot. Dad with his law firm and mom as a top executive at a big company. So they didn't have time for the small stuff. That's where I came in. The house, always spotless. The errands, done in an hour. The meals, cooked. But my parents didn't really seem to notice. It was just expected. And whenever I wanted to do something for myself, like going out with friends or taking a break, I'd hear the familiar phrase, "You're here to help, not to have fun." That was pretty much the pattern all through high school and college. I'd do the work, they'd do their thing, and I never really asked for much in return. I wasn't resentful at first, or maybe I didn't know to be. It's just how things were. They were the parents, and I was the one who was there to make life easier for them. But as I got older, I started to see things more clearly. I began to resent how little recognition I got, how I was treated like I was just a utility. I was never asked about my goals, my dreams, or even just how my day went. And as I entered my 20s, it got worse. Elijah started his own business and quickly became the star of the family. Whenever he achieved anything, the praise he received was enough to make anyone feel like an afterthought. My parents would tell me, "Why can't you be more like Elijah? He's ambitious. He's going places." Of course, I try to do things for myself too. I was working hard in my own career, trying to build my own life, but somehow it felt like no matter what I did, it was never enough. If I wasn't achieving at the same level as Elijah, I was basically invisible. Then, at 23, I made a decision that I thought would finally give me the freedom I'd been craving. I moved out. It was huge for me, finally breaking away from that environment. No more being the family servant. No more feeling like I had to make myself small just to fit into their world. It felt like I could finally breathe. But it didn't take long for my family to find ways to pull me back in. At first, it was subtle, little asks here and there. My mom would call me for advice on decorating the house, or my dad would ask me to help with a quick project around the yard. It wasn't so bad at first, but then it started to become more regular. And when I visited for holidays, the requests turned into demands. I'd show up to family gatherings, and they'd hand me a list of chores like it was nothing. "Could you organize the garage while we're eating dinner?" my dad would ask. "The basement needs cleaning," my mom would say. And I would do it because it's what I'd always done. I was the helper. I wasn't allowed to relax, not while they had a job for me. I never complained. I didn't feel like I had the right to, but it started to weigh on me. I started to notice the tone in their voices, the way they assumed I'd just drop everything for them, as though I had no life of my own. One weekend, when I'd come home to visit, I was asked to clean out the attic. I'd barely unpacked my bag when my mom said, "Don't just stand there. The attic isn't going to clean itself." I was exhausted. I hadn't had a break in what felt like months. I remember standing there, holding the broom, feeling this overwhelming frustration. But what could I do? They were my parents. I couldn't say no, right? Then there was the time they asked me to cater a family dinner. They had some friends coming over, and of course, they'd never think to hire someone else. It was always me. I had to prep everything, cook it all, and serve. They acted like it was nothing. And after the dinner, I was expected to clean up while they sat around and chatted with their guests. I was starting to burn out, but I didn't know how to say no without feeling like I was being ungrateful. Then came that one night when everything finally came to a head. I was home for the weekend again, and my mom handed me a new list of things to do. There was no, "How was your week?" or "Are you feeling okay?" It was just another task. I'd spent hours cleaning, cooking, and doing errands. And at the end of it all, they barely acknowledged the work I'd done. My dad made a comment about how nice it was to have me around, but it wasn't a compliment. It was just another way to remind me that I was there to work for them. That's when I snapped. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, throwing the list back at her. The words came out before I even realized what I was saying. My mom looked at me, surprised. "What do you mean? We need your help. You're here to help, remember?" I just stared at her. I couldn't believe the words I was hearing. That's what I'd always been to them, a helper. That's all I was ever good for. And something in me finally broke. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. I walked out of their house without looking back. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some kind of apology, maybe some understanding. But that never came. Instead, they acted like I was the one who had betrayed them. I didn't hear from them for a while after that. I focused on my own life, working, traveling, doing what I wanted for once. But then about 6 months later, I started getting calls and messages, a lot of them, from my mom, from my dad, and even from Elijah. They had fallen on hard times. The business Elijah had started had tanked, and my parents were struggling financially. They were reaching out to me for help like they always had, and I didn't know what to think. Should I go back? Would it be wrong not to help? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how deep their dependence on me went. They never really cared about what I wanted, what I needed. They only cared about what I could do for them. The calls didn't stop. But it wasn't just the constant barrage of messages that made me start questioning everything. It was the way they worded it. At first, it was just my mom calling me once or twice a week, asking for a favor. Then, the tone of her requests shifted. Instead of her usual, "Can you help us out with this?" it became, "We really need you right now. You're the only one who can help." She said it like it was my duty to fix things, to make their problems disappear. Like I was some sort of lifeline they could reach out to whenever their world started falling apart. One afternoon, I got a voicemail from her that left me thinking about everything I'd gone through. "Honey, please, if you can just come over for a couple of days, help us clean up a bit. It's getting really overwhelming here. We're not sure how much longer we can keep everything together without you." When I heard that, I sat there, staring at the phone for what felt like forever. It wasn't just the words. It was the desperation in her voice. My mom had never sounded like this before. She'd always been the one with everything under control. And now, she was practically pleading. I remember sitting on my couch in my apartment, trying to think of what to do. It wasn't just the cleaning they needed help with. They needed money too. Their bills were piling up because Elijah's business had failed and my parents were sinking fast. They didn't have the same income anymore, and their lifestyle was crumbling. But here's the kicker. They weren't asking for a loan. They didn't want to talk about how they could change their habits. No, they wanted me to fix it all by cleaning their house, taking care of errands, and making everything run smoothly again. That was their idea of a solution. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I wanted to help, I really did. But I knew deep down that this wasn't the answer. I'd been helping my entire life, and I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for them. Then came the moment that made everything click. One evening, I was scrolling through social media, and I saw a post from Elijah. It wasn't a business update or some personal triumph like I'd expected. No, it was a picture of him and my parents sitting around a table at some fancy restaurant. They were laughing, drinking wine, looking as happy as ever. My parents, the ones who had been begging me for help, were out celebrating. Without me, it hit me like a ton of bricks. They had no problem enjoying their life, even as they asked me to come fix theirs. It wasn't about needing me. It was about convenience. It was always about convenience. I couldn't stop thinking about that image. The fact that they had the nerve to post it, to pretend everything was fine while they reached out to me, asking for help, asking for me to save them from the mess they created. I made up my mind right then. I was done feeling guilty. Over the next few weeks, I ignored every message, every voicemail. I kept living my life. I didn't respond to any of their calls, and I didn't feel bad about it. But one night, about a month after the last message, I got a call from Elijah himself. I hesitated for a second before picking it up. "Hey," he said, his voice calmer than I expected. "Look, I know things haven't been great between us, but you're the only one who can help us. I'm really sorry for everything." I sat there, holding the phone, wondering what had changed. Elijah had always been the golden boy, the one who never seemed to have to work for anything. I had no idea what he was expecting from me, but his voice sounded genuine. But then again, that's exactly what they'd all sounded like. Genuine when they wanted something. "I'm not coming back to help you," I told him flatly. "I've been there my whole life, and I can't keep doing this. You and Mom should figure out." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Elijah sighed deeply. "I understand. I get it. But don't be mad at us forever, okay? Just think about it. We really need you." I hung up the phone, unsure of how I felt. There was a mix of satisfaction, relief, and anger, but also this lingering frustration with myself. Was I really supposed to be the one to bail them out every time things got tough? A few weeks later, I heard the news. Elijah's business was officially a bust. And to make matters worse, my parents were selling their house. They had to cut back on so much. It was like everything I had predicted was coming true. They put themselves in a hole by relying on me too much, and now they had no one left to turn to. For a while, it felt like they might just vanish into their own mess. It wasn't my problem. It was theirs. I had been living my life, enjoying the freedom of being away from my family's constant demands. But then, out of the blue, I ran into Elijah at a local coffee shop. I hadn't seen him in months, and his appearance caught me off guard. His usual confident demeanor was gone. He looked disheveled, worn down. His eyes were tired, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world was pressing on him. When he saw me, he didn't even try to act like everything was fine. Instead, he simply sat down across from me and said, "I'm sorry, I know I've messed up, but things are falling apart, and we can't keep going like this. We really need you." It was the first time I'd heard him say anything like that. It was raw, unfiltered, and maybe a little desperate. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy, but then I reminded myself of everything that had happened, everything they had put me through. I couldn't just fall back into the old role of being their lifeline. Still, I couldn't help but feel torn. The guilt crept in, but there was something else too, a question. Could this be my chance to make them see how much they had taken me for granted? Maybe I could turn the tables, make them realize how dependent they were on me, not just for the chores or the cleaning, but for everything. Maybe, just maybe, I could make them understand how they had treated me all these years. But even as I thought about it, I couldn't shake the fear of going back, of being sucked back into that cycle where I was nothing more than the person they could rely on when they were in trouble. I didn't want to fall back into that role, but at the same time, the temptation to make them see the truth was overwhelming. I didn't know if I was ready to walk away for good yet. But one thing was certain. If I went back, it wouldn't be the same. I wouldn't be the same person who had left. I had changed too much. As the days passed, I found myself replaying our conversation in my head over and over. Elijah's words echoed in my mind. "We really need you." And while part of me wanted to reach out and help, Another part of me wondered if it was a trap, if I would just fall back into the same pattern, doing everything for them and never receiving anything in return. So I kept my distance, tried to focus on my life. But then, a week later, my mom called. This time, there was no message asking for help. She just said, "The Dad, I want to talk. Can you come by for dinner?" It was such a simple request, and yet something about it felt different. I had avoided them for so long, and now they wanted to talk without asking for anything. My first instinct was to say no, to keep up the distance. But that nagging curiosity got the better of me. What do they want? Was this an attempt at reconciliation, or was there something more to it? As I walked through the door, I felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. My parents were sitting at the dining table, waiting for me. The atmosphere was different from our usual encounters. It wasn't tense, but there was an undeniable weight in the air. They seemed almost nervous, like they weren't sure how to approach me after everything that had happened. My mom stood up first. "We've been thinking a lot about how we've treated you, and we realize we've taken you for granted. We know we've made a lot of mistakes. And Elijah told us how you've been feeling, and we're sorry." There it was, the apology I had wanted for so long. But even as the words left her mouth, I couldn't fully embrace them. It wasn't just about hearing them say sorry. It was about all the years of neglect, the constant expectations, and the way I had been treated like a backup plan whenever things went wrong. I'd already given up so much for them, and now they were asking for my help again, even after everything they'd put me through. Elijah was sitting next to my mom, and his gaze was steady, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. "We know we messed up," he said quietly, "but we're asking for your help, just this once. We can't fix everything without you." And just like that, the roles I had fought so hard to escape came rushing back. They needed me. They always needed me. And while I felt a flicker of empathy, I also felt the resentment welling up. They hadn't changed, not really. They were just in a tough spot, and now they were looking for the same old thing, for me to fix it. I looked at them both for a long time. The guilt I had been carrying for so long, wondering if I was being too harsh, if I was being selfish, flooded back. But then I remembered everything that had led me to this point. The years of being invisible, the constant demands without appreciation, the fact that I had never once been asked about what I needed. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling my voice waver despite myself. "But I can't help you like this. I've been there for you my whole life, and I need to take care of myself now. I'm not your backup. I'm not here to fix everything for you." There was a long silence. My mom and Elijah just stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and frustration. They were clearly hurt by my refusal, but I couldn't go back. I couldn't fall into the same old pattern of being the family fixer when no one had ever bothered to truly care for me in return. I left their house that night with a strange mix of relief and guilt. I'd stood my ground, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss because deep down, I knew they would never truly understand. So here I am now. My parents are still struggling, and Elijah's business is still in shambles. They've tried reaching out a few times since then, but I've kept my distance. I've been focusing on my life, on the career and personal goals I've finally started building for myself. And I'm not sure if that's selfish or if it's just me finally standing up for myself. I'm not sure where things will go with them, but for now, I'm not ready to go back to the role I used to play. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for not helping them when they've clearly hit rock bottom? I feel bad, but I also know I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness for them. Should I have helped, or did I make the right choice? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Drop a comment below with your thoughts.